Thank you. It's my great pleasure to address you today, along with such a distinguished panel of speakers from the Israeli government, the greater Jewish world, and our religious leaders. My apologies for appearing on videotape and not being in London with you today. The Jerusalem Post chose an intriguing topic for this conference: fighting anti-Semitism through business, sports, and tolerance. There is absolutely no question that we must confront today's dramatic increase in Jew hatred from all quarters. And that is what we should call it from now on: Jew hatred instead of anti-Semitism, because Jew hatred is stronger, more to the point, and less sanitized. Anti-Semitism is a holdover from the 19th century, and it's lost its meaning. No one cares when they hear anti-Semitism. From now on, let's call it what it really is: the hatred of Jews, Jew hatred. A fight against Jewish hatred must be constant, because the hatred of Jews is constant. It's never gone away for thousands of years. It recreates itself like a virus, and it comes back in new and deadlier ways. And we have to be even more creative in our fight against it. But before we even talk about the problems facing Jews, we can't ignore what is happening in the world today. It is the elephant in the room at this conference, and it has a name: Ukraine. At this moment, the entire world is watching in horror as a sovereign nation, Ukraine, is being destroyed. Once vital cities with large apartment buildings surrounded by schools and businesses, cities filled with life, are now scenes of terrible devastation. Upwards of 10 million people are now part of a long line of refugees seeking food, shelter, and safety. If there's anything positive in this tragedy, I know that it's hard to find, but the response from the surrounding countries, Poland, Belarus, Hungary, Moldova, Romania, and Slovakia, and countries all over the world, has been so impressive. They have done an amazing job finding homes, shelters, and even jobs for these refugees. The Jewish communities have done their part as well. There was a featured story in the New York Times about how the Lauder Jewish schools had already put young Ukrainian children in their classrooms in Vienna, Berlin, and Warsaw, and Budapest, and elsewhere. In Israel, families have found jobs in the Negev. As the country makes thousands feel welcome, as Israel has always done to Jewish people seeking refuge. But I think there is a huge lesson that Israel should take from Ukraine. It should be obvious to all of us, and we ignore it at our peril. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that if, God forbid, the same destruction that we now have seen in Ukraine came to Israel, from Iran, from Hamas, from Hezbollah, if Tel Aviv and Jerusalem were ravaged like Kiev and Kharkiv, if Israelis were killed randomly, as whole neighborhoods were shelled, and the entire world might offer words, some countries might offer to take in those who survive, but they would do nothing to stop it. Absolutely nothing. When those who want to see Israel destroyed, today they see Ukraine. When Iran stages death to Israel demonstrations for over 40 years, today they now dream of Ukraine. When the terrorists plan their attacks against Israelis, today they see Ukraine. If you need any more proof, look at the world's reaction last year when Hamas launched 4,000 missiles against Israeli cities. In the most inverted logic, the world condemned Israel for defending itself. That is why Israel has never allowed anyone else to fight its wars, because we all know that Israel cannot count on anyone else to defend it. The only people who will protect the Jewish state, the only people who will make sure that Israel never turns into Ukraine, are the Israeli people. We must never allow what is happening in Ukraine to happen to Israel. Without question, Iran is the most significant threat facing Israel today. The world could stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. But the New Deal that is being pushed won't do that. Israel must do what is in Israel's best interest, to stop Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. Israel must first use all diplomatic means possible, but at the same time, it must take it very clear that it will never accept a nuclear Iran. There is a long history of world cowardice, from Neville Chamberlain to the carving up Czechoslovakia, to the slaughter of millions of human beings in the Holocaust. And we see that same cowardly behavior with how the world is caving to Iran. So Israel must do what is best for Israel and not worry about world opinion. It's probably going to be anti-Israel anyway. I want to remind you that when Israel destroyed Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor in 1981, it received the world's condemnation. But not long after, everyone quickly realized that Israel did the world a big favor. Those Scud missiles Saddam Hussein fired in the first Gulf War might have been nuclear if Israel had not acted on its own 10 years earlier. There's another threat to Israel and the Jewish people, not nearly as dangerous as Iran, but it could have serious long-term consequences. And that is the relationship between Israel and the diaspora, and the divide between religious and secular Jews. Today I can tell you as president of the World Jewish Congress that Israel is losing the support of the diaspora. 78% of diaspora Jews are not Orthodox. They're Reform, conservative, or nothing at all. And although they still might back Israel politically, they don't feel welcome there, particularly those from mixed marriages. And remember, 50% of all marriages in the diaspora are mixed marriages. We must do everything in our power to change this. Israel needs the diaspora, and the diaspora needs to look at Israel as a second home. We must always remember that we are one people, from the most Orthodox to the most secular, from the most conservative to the most liberal. And we should act as one people. If we see each other as one people, and if we stand up for each other, then our enemies will never succeed. Israel's enemies could not defeat it militarily. They could not defeat it economically. But they began a third front. They have attacked Israel politically. And this is having a devastating impact by using education and filling colleges and universities with professors trained to demonize Israel. They're turning a generation against the Jewish state. The generation of Jews born during and right after the Holocaust were profoundly pro-Israel. The next generation slightly less, but we are losing the grandchildren of the Holocaust generation because they are being taught lies about Israel, even at the best colleges. This negative feeling towards Israel touches all aspects of society, especially young people, on the left and the right. Sadly, even Jews. A recent survey by the Jewish Electoral Institute shows that upwards of 20% of American Jews oppose the very idea of a Jewish state. The World Jewish Congress is opening a special division on education. There are 900 Jewish schools in the U.S. today, but many youngsters who may want a Jewish education cannot afford it. We are now working on a scholarship fund that will change this dynamic. I want to see every Jewish child that wants a Jewish education should get an education, and money should never be a factor. If we don't do this, if we continue to let the next generation of Jewish children learn nothing about their heritage, They will stop defining themselves as Jewish. They won't care. And why should they if we don't teach them? I need to emphasize this point again. We are losing our next generation, and we must work to stop this immediately. The World Jewish Congress is now supporting young Jewish activists on campus, real leaders who have on their own created websites in support of Zionism and against Jew hatred. They have experience from professors, administrators, and other students. I want to tell you that I've met these brave youngsters, and it really gives me hope. I won't give details on what we are doing, but I can tell you that we are directly involved in helping them in their work. Our world is going through a great trauma at this conference convenes. We don't know how it will resolve itself. We don't even know its ramifications for years to come. But this we do know, that the Jewish people act as one if we continue to watch out for each other, from Ukraine to Israel to the United States, at all points in between. Then we will be so much stronger to face whatever comes our way. I repeat my points. The mortal danger of Iran, one unified people fighting anti-Zionism and Jewish education to strengthen the commitment and pride of our next generation. Nothing could be more important for our people and our future. We did not come through 5,000 years of history just to let it end here. It can't, it won't. But it's each of us to make sure that it doesn't. Thank you. And may God bring peace to our world and continue to bless the Jewish people. Am Yisrael Chai.